presume applicant's structural skew makes it hard to confirm LDs proven by 7% negative bias, a sample size of 32,000 rounds of case tie. I will have overcome greatest advantage and thus done better debating. Second, if the applicant's optimal counter truth when time being tier theory vote after is A, the spread negative spread the after the 1 out theory, particular shoot time previous the game over issue. B, competing mutual truth theoretical interpretation resolution. Fourth, the applicant done B, subject to theory no matter what on the AC. At worst, drop the arguments after defendant interpret should be punished speaking first. Third, don't vote a potential abuse. A, with potential abuse punishment to be something I might have done something someone else might have done, but the judge only jurisdiction happens in the rounds the balance post select happens. This round, not out of application. B, potential abuse and feeling aggressive. Those possibilities are become abusive later on in the round. C, potential abuse punishment for something I didn't do with the definition of unfair practice and punishment not deserved. Fourth, indictment accepts the resolution firm substance function to condition the resolution valuation mean entire resolution free phrase conditional statement facts condition met victim that you death enforced simple propositional logic dictates conditional statements always true if the antecedent is false. Fifth, the negative use normative logic derives stable conclusion by the falsity of the resolution obligation critique my ask you some action of the resolution fails directly to food. The normativity of the resolution action textuality is key to fairness terms only be preparation critiques also kill as cheat cops in fact new preclusive later forcing after we start debating when you are strategy key form create balance during this winning round. Six, fairness is bonus system being true to get rounds ready use valid over favor one side has another and B skill cup 3 seats all subset arguments including pre-PI cakes. A can valid subset arguments it's unfair we don't know who's actually winning the argument for K we don't know who's actually winning if it's unfair debate because we need valid fairness before the K. B the ballot asks the better debaters not the better cheaters fairness is most key to ballot also means the precedes takes ballot is asked what who the critique winner is K finds moral permissibility. A given action is morally prohibited no moral exercise reason not acting giving away permissions not entail moral reasons the action is free sufficient down prohibition further same because it comes from a professor who knows that common usage grammar's opposite resolution common usage key to fairness to teachability for market system around that means the skeptic firms and internalism fails to count the categorical nature of moral imperatives leads skepticism consequence 1. Moral claims purport to apply to all ages considered an agent has a strong desire to murder. Most of us hold the agent should not murder in terms of difficult generate discluded terms of the truth and it would only be an accident. Most of us reason not to murder truth claim to depend on contingent feature of our psychologies and externalism cannot find sufficient justification for this reason to agent to act leading skepticism morality must be able to guide action consequence 2. External reasons are statements that true independently of an agent's motivation nothing explaining the agent's potential action something that motivates him to act fact murder wrong is verb no explanation the person's decision not to murder the fact that must somehow figure into the etiology of the agent's action this suggests that fact murder wrong must exert motivational influence upon the person's action the agent must have some motive suitably connected to not murder. Constitutivism avoids the pitfalls of both internals and externals while capturing the benefits of each theory. Consequence 3. There is an element of truth in both the internals and externals. Position the agent must possess certain aim in order to be in order to claim from truth. Constitutive trace the normative theory of norms. The aim of the constitutive agent, that constitutive being an agent, the constitutive aim is not optional. If lack the aim, you're not an agent. All the relevant aim is one that's intrinsic being an agent. Accordingly, there is non-optional reason for acting. Therefore, a constitutive is meta standards necessary to obtain individuals' agents meaning constitutive is not normative. There would be moral agents involved in skepticism that's meaningless to us. Additionally, before constitutivism says first, action necessarily part constitutive aim else you're not really acting, you're just moving. Consequence 4. Activities necessarily require aims such as chess is not sufficient to counter playing chess to move pieces on the board in accordance with rules. One is aim to achieve checkmate. If you don't have the aim, you're just moving pieces, not playing chess. You are engaged in different activity with different constitutive aim. Because ethics entails normative evaluation of actions, constitution requires that the relative determinant morality is the action itself. Others' morality no relation to action doesn't lose meaning. Moreover, constitutivism is able to provide non-circular basic morality established with standards of intrinsic standards of normative success. Consequence 5. The constitutivist aims standard success intrinsic to the activity in question. You can't play a chess game without aiming to achieve checkmate. Chess game is defective to not achieve checkmate. Constitutive aims generic intrinsic standard of normative success and action has a constitutive aim and the aim will be present in every instance of the action. Thus, it gives a non-optional standard assessment of the action standard that applies merely by virtue of the fact that something in action constitutive and generates a non-optional normative conclusion by relying on this very spare claim that the connection between aims and relevant standards. And constitutive is the only way to have a coherent system of value. Smith. Something's being good K1 can't just map to being good and K1 because it's due to follow something being good K1 and being K2 that's good K2. Where this does not follow a good tennis player playing chess need not be a good chess player. Judgments of goodness are made relative to the kind of question. Good K is good qua K. Being K was self-set standards. A K has to be if it is be good qua K. Being a chess player is, for example, self-set standards being a good chess player. And thus the meta-ethic of constitutivism is defined as valuing the normativity of actions based on inherent aims of aid to take those actions. The will to power is the will to overcome obstacles that stand in the way of one's ends. Consequence 6. The will to power is the will to move forward, mastering over that which stands in one's way. The power to determine it stands to competition over other ends. An artist overcomes difficulties inherent in turning blank canvas into a paint. A scientist overcomes challenges inherent in understanding. The will to power takes manifold forms to share one feature commitment to overcome an obstacle to ride the pursuit of that. Thus the standard is consistency with the will to power. The will to overcome resistance is implicit in every action. Consequence 7. The claim we will power is not about what we will, it's about how we will. When everyone wills an end, the willing consists not only in the aim of achieving some end, but also in the aim of overcoming resistance in pursuit of that end. Given that the will is for power, the will to power is a form of relation to power without a formal aim present in every instance of willing. Whenever an organism wills an end, the organism wills that end in a certain way. It wills that achievement of the end by overcoming resistance. Whenever an agent wills an action, there is a drive behind the drive is two parts, the aim and the object. The aim is the goal, the object is the means. Consequence 8. Drives are motivational states with two kinds of goals. First, the aim of the drive is the goal, though the aim of each drive remains interchangeable. There may be different paths leading to the same aim. Second, the object drives the way the drive is able to achieve the aim. The object is a temporary goal point the drive finds expression, while the aim of the aggressive drive is the aggressive activity. The object will vary. It could be physical struggle, the participation, the support the drive seeks. Object simply by fulfilling its aim. Required to find objects upon which direct activity. Drives don't aim at achieving some determined state of affairs. Rather, drives aim at the process of expression. There's a crucial difference between drives and desires because desires aim at achieving states of affairs. This is in that case with drives or conscious force inclined to engage in certain processes of other objects or occasions for expression. What the drive seeks is just the expression. The drive is satisfied only when being expressed, when the process that motivates its progress. Drives are process-directed rather than goal-directed. A goal-directed act is an act that aims to attain some definite goal. Thus, it would cease once the object is achieved. Process-directed act is one that aims at the process, thus with no object that would bring the process to an end. The will to overcome resistance is simply the object of the drive that stands behind any act of willing. So long as you are pursuing an end to overcome resistance, your actions are permissible because the only thing constitutive of agency is to overcome resistance. Finally, the first stand because independently constitutive, since whatever one wills and any will is necessary means that its power to pass to achieve ends willing, increasing one's power to implicit every act of willing. I contend the killing domestic violence views of permissible under the will to power. First, victim is state and potency, meaning that he or she necessarily needs to overcome resistance to achieve any constitutive aim. He or she will need to overcome resistance to levels, pressure, and aggressor. Second, the act of killing overcome resistance struggle to achieve the end. Third, any particular action is permissible so long as will is a means to achieve the end. The particular end that is willed is irrelevant. All that matters is the actor exerting power to achieve the end. Thus, any particular action with deadly force is always permissible. So the resolution is permissible. So you affirm.
Alright, keep this in order, and while we're talking about that, why do we evaluate the resolution from the subjective perspective of the victim as opposed to, for example, the abuser or some neutral observer?
Okay,
Right,
so
how do we know whose will to power matters?
it's not about whose will to power matters, just that objectively, any being that overcomes resistance is permissible, any action.
So, okay, so regardless, the
As
abuser's
long as
action
the
is
agent
permissible
is-
and the victim's action is permissible.
Okay, the abusers, I never said that the
Is there
abuser's
ever
action is permissible. I never
an
said domestic
impermissible
violence is
action?
permissible.
Okay,
What?
so how
If
can
you
we
were to
say
argue that,
something's
I would give
impermissible?
reasons why, what?
So how can we say that things are impermissible under your
Okay,
perception of will to
if it
power?
doesn't overcome resistance.
Okay, so what does that mean? Like, for example, does that mean I can
Okay,
get
for
solvency
example,
indicts on the
domestic,
AC?
vi- I could argue potentially that domestic violence is impermissible because it's not overcoming resistance because they're, channelizing.
Okay, what
would
about
be-
solvency indicts? If you using deadly force actually leads to more oppression.
Yeah,
for you,
that's irrelevant.
that's irrelevant?
That's irrelevant.
Why?
Because that has nothing to do with willing the constitutive aim of overcoming resistance.
Okay, and why is willing the only relevant aspect, as opposed to having an end?
Okay, so end states of affairs are irrelevant. First, they're precluded by constitutivism because
Okay, what's the
constitutivism
warning?
grounds warrant in
You said the constitutivism is necessary. Why does that mean the constitutivism is the only thing, i.e. it is sufficient? So let's
Okay,
say...
it is constitutivism provides a meta-ethical grounding for morality. It's where we derive
Okay.
morality. Goodness.
So what's my burden? What do I have to
So
prove?
your burden is to prove that affirming does not overcome resistance.
Wait, what does that mean? You just said I can't get solvency indicts on end state. So what...
Yeah, so it's not
form
end
of-
states of affairs.
Right, so what
The
argument-
act of
how would
the
my
act of
argument work?
affirming does not overcome resistance. So, for example, back to my previous example about why
Right.
domestic violence, I could argue would be impermissible, would be that the abuser is not overcoming resistance. Beating someone in
Okay.
your family is like if they wanted to overcome resistance, if they were a constitutive agent, then they would go, actually fix the problems in their
Okay.
life instead of taking
Where
it
are
out
the
on
skep
people
triggers?
in their family. Okay, so Katspanis 1 says that
Right.
internalism devolves.
How many
into
step
steps.
triggers are there? And point
3.
them out to me. 3. Okay. And if I disprove the framework, you can go for these skep triggers and say that affirms, right? You're saying skepticism affirms, right?
I
That's
say
that's why they're there.
Yeah, I say, well, it's not why they're there, it's that you run skepticism. I said internalism can be equated with skepticism.
Me
So,
run skepticism?
so if you run internalism without responding why internalism is skepticism, then you're running skepticism. Right? Constitutivism
Okay.
overcomes skepticism. So you can respond to the framework without triggering skepticism. So,
Wait,
You-
so if the framework is false, and your argument is that
Yeah.
without constitutivism, skepticism is triggered, that triggers skep and you affirm, right?
no. Because, yes, but that's the meta standard. The meta ethic is constitutivism. So you can find a alternate ethic that links to the
Right.
same meta ethic without triggering skepticism. So
Okay.
you have outs with this AC.
Right. I'll start probing. Can I see the theory practice in the beginning? Oh, right. Which of cost response cards are necessary for the framework and which are simply there that you can use? Are they all necessary, or are there some
They're
that...
not all necessary.
What do you have to extend in order to load the framework?
Okay, so I can just like have one more for constituentism that can come from Smith.
Okay, are they all independent warrants for constituentism? All 8?
No.
Okay. How many are
Constituentism.
independent warrants for
Okay,
constituentism?
Katsufanas 6, 7, and 8 are not talking about constituentism. They're justifications for the will power.
So 1 through 5 in Smith?
Will powers is 1 through 5 in Smith. 1 and 2 are not warrants for constituentism. They're saying why internalism externally fails. They function together with 3, which says that constituentism avoids the problems with internals and externalism.
Okay. And the difference between constituentism and externalism is what? What's the gradation between internalism, constituentism, and externalism?
So internalism says that reasons have to be internal to the agent, which fails to account for categorical nature of morality. Constituentism solves that because it says that you have reasons merely by being agent, so it applies to all agents.
So reasons that come from within the agent but can be applied in a categorical way are that solve that issue.
Sorry, what?
Never mind, it's fine.
Okay, then external reasons are reasons that are applied external to the agent. For example,
Right.
an external, the source of obligation is external.
Right.
That fails because for something to be a reason, it has to play a role in explanation of the person's action, because there has to be some sort of causal relation between the act and the action. This corresponds to. But that link, there's a disconnect between the act and the action, so that link is missing with externalism. Constituentism solves that because you have a non-optional standard, because to be an agent at all,
Okay.
you have to possess that certain role.
Alright, 46. Theory, NC, AC. You have the outline?
Just take a second to do
Yeah, for sure. I'll pause. Read the theory and NC. We are done at 46. Is everyone ready?
Are you reading?
Yes. You want me to stand over here? I can flash it over to you if you want.
Sure.
Right. Are you okay with me just reading like this?
Yeah.
I'm just not gonna waste time. Okay. Yeah, I'll just read it. Okay. I'll sit down if it's easier because you can see. I'll be loud though. Ready? My interpretation is that the affirmative and negative must advocate one consistent ethical framework, cannot change the ethical framework implications if it is false, which is that you cannot have any skeptical triggers or triggers to other frameworks that can be reasons to affirm in the late speech if I disprove their argument. This means they cannot trigger new ethical framework based on the responses I make. The only legitimate ways are either to answer back my response to the ACE framework, or concede those answers, concede the NC framework the violations that he says that their skep triggers originally in the AEC. This is even if he concedes the NC framework in the next speech, it's not going to solve back the abuse based on the standards. That means that he says that there are 3 independent skep triggers that debate internalism argument, the externalism argument, and the other argument. Standard strategies to A. When I have to adapt the app, I have to have double layer of arguments because the AC is designed to trigger the same inspired arguments answering frames, so I have to predict the triggers how they function overcome the ones type dog. He's going to try to extend, or he's going to try to make the argument that I can link the meta ethic, link an NC into the meta ethic. My argument is that means I cannot actually disprove the meta ethic, because if I disprove the argument, that still triggers the argument. Which means I'm stuck my strategy, stuck with linking into that ethic, which is he defines my strategy for me, because he can there are a limited number of decisions that I can run that link to meta ethic, especially on the constraints within the topic. I can't just run any sort of meta ethical framework, because there still have to be topical arguments to link in, which means I have to like constraints of topical literature. B, this forced me to contradict myself, so I have to make links to contradictory trigger frames. This means I have to shift my strategy, make sure I don't do that. So either A, blinds me from one way out strategy, so I lose, or B, forces me to lose time strategy, so it harms the NC strategy. C is defensive ground. This prevents me from reading good defense on the AC framework or the AC meta ethic, because if I answer I trigger a different ethical framework. For example, he could extend my one response to constituentism and say that that triggers skepticism, which means that would always lead to you affirming the resolution independently of whether I defend skepticism or not. Computer strategies are keep fairness with the utilize arguments, create a balance, story the truth terms of whether I can win around the voters, fairness, voting on fairness, and necessary respect for voluntary tasks, even forms based on debate, arbitrary distribution, burdens, residents incapable of determining how we should engage in discussion. Lowland writes. The obligation of fairness is not aroused unconditionally, parties voluntarily engage in the participation of an opposite participation, have legal to follow the commonly accepted rules, norms, practices, good burdens are distributed in arbitrary ways, there's no definition or what each wish contributor to receive from our cooperation. This also means that arguments about structural issues like the app times square, the app times be aren't relevant because my argument is that when we are in the debate round, we've already agreed to certain preconditions, i.e. the fact that there are time limits, which is the only relevant fairness implications are ones that that both of us freely engage in, as opposed to things that are already coming in the round. Also, you should drop the debate on violations of fairness to rectify the broken consciousness interaction. AC spikes about dropping the argument. Lowland too. In the case of intentional violation, the restoration of the initial situation is not enough. Contributes participants voluntarily restrict their liberty to compete and setting mutual trust is broken. Intentional rule violation call for additional penalties where the players are expelled from the game. Vote on fairness also participating competitive activity grounds unfair. You don't know for winning flow because they're bid because structural inequity. You should also drop the bid because dropping the argument theory negative time trade-offs and took me 3 minutes straight third. It takes 3 seconds to kick the argument this one. Encourage the abuse and debaters make abuse of argument. The AC stands to basic time taking the 1 hour. Also reasonability appeals to judge to mention one something quick reasonable special reasonability to last judge subjective view one. There should be on also reasonability standards should be based on if there's actual abuse in the round 5 of the strategy is always keep which your ideas mean to use asking standing you should use for reasonability because otherwise it encourages judge intervention. So actually transition to AC on the RDI arguments and then the NC. First on the RDI arguments. As I read. 1, you should not vote on RDIs because you award the act just being their jobs like wearing pants to a debate around. Second, there's already a two-way street because the act can run here and other issues. There's no reason why it has to be a two-way street in the same one, so it's all the reciprocity and times issues because direct comparison across the shells. He does not have to spread himself over the theory and substance. He can run his theory on something else that I do. Theory if there were true, I would discourage better interpretation of the debate. It's just better theory, so if that's worse norms overall because the norms contingent on skills opposed to objective determination would be good for the community. 4, it's worse for the act because the neck could go all in on theory, whereas if the act just covers it's less likely the act can still one on substance where they can go all in. His only argument is the times two arguments that is irrelevant because I'm already taking that out both on the voter and on this argument. Then go to the NC. I negate an advocate that the existentialism, which is the belief there's no absolute meaning of God, human beings are the source of all meaning, things require explanation, but the only possible explanation of the absolute is the original source meaning, how the absolute rationally comprehensible cannot be explained, which means that there cannot be any explanation of existence. Hochberg 1 explains. The relationships among diverse things require explanation. The source of an explanation can only come to in some all-embracing unity which accounts for all diversity requires an explanation. The Platonic form is not then explaining reality. The ultimate source of explanation, reality coalescence to explain something to account for its being in terms of some other entity. The explanation where order plays a chain of meaning. The ultimate level of explanation could then only some absolute unity. Therefore, to accept the absolute is to relinquish the search for an explanation. So when it explains, in terms of something rationally comprehensible, the rapid comprehension rejects it. It leads us to conclude there can be no explanation which is comprehensible must be found in terms of ordinary experience. To give a rational half of meanings to the to do so in terms of absolute unity that the absolute God required to give meaning. Yes, it's meaningless and it's not others. Well, my argument is that the NC ethic is going to link into meta-ethic of the constitutivist because it's going to say that there's the objective standard of not killing derived from the subjective appearance of the agent in terms of their own existences. Everything is unexplainable. Existence has no hidden meaning. Only is all we know for sure is that we exist and there are others who are similarly trapped in the same situation of ourselves. This meaninglessness is the absurd condition of human existence. Ethics must acknowledge the truth because it is unstable. Have the search for truth provides way to create meaning. Search for our knowledge and face the absurd way to cope with the despondency of existence. Hochberg 2. The human is capable of knowing the situation, but this does not overcome contradiction. The human situation is revolt, does not die what he does, because he cannot escape from the paradox of being. Life becomes fruitful since it is the source of the freedom of being. The revolt against the absurd universe provides great attention, serves as the capacity to show the consciousness and enables humans to cope with the despondency of existence. Also, you should further serve the constitutives. We need to be doesn't link him because the constitutivism doesn't tell you what our aim is, i.e., we can derive some sort of external principles and internal principles of what our aim is, as opposed to like always think some sort of is not fallacy as to what our aim necessarily is. My argument is that this is our the only thing we know is that we exist. The only aim that we can have is to like make sense of the existence and position for truth. So my burden is that if I prove that one of these moral rules would prohibit killing, you negate because the act justifies the use of deadly force. This meets the context of your resolution for design proving it's morally permissible. First, the other is necessary to understand when self-choose is impermissible to kill others. Sartre. The theory alone is compatible with dignity since it does not make man an object instead of predetermined reactions to different qualities and so on. Our aim is to establish human kingdoms distinct from material rules. And I say I think we attain to ourselves the presence of the other. We're discovering himself discovers the other as a condition of the existence. We cannot be anything else. Others recognize this as such. I cannot obtain any truth by myself except through mediation. Another since the other is incidental to my existence and does not recognize myself. Therefore, we cannot kill others because the other key to understanding ourselves is contrary to existentials. Because the point is to gain understanding the world and therefore our own meaning. Second, we cannot looking at absolute external to the humanity, which would necessitate now the absurd Camus. The second commandment is how punishment in society. This man is no try to make me amends. We all have done wrong in our lives. There are no just people living in our lives to discover the stats and some of the good may make up for the evil. This is the right of every man, even the worst, the lowest of criminals, and the most upright in the action, people who resting their solidarity without their right moral life is utterly impossible. When abstinence of judgment is closed and counting the creditor's life. This means that constitution involves conditions, whatever you believe you have to take into account the other people also. Even if it is about your aim, you would never achieve your aim. If you kill another person, because the point of your existence is to search for the truth that it negates your truth, because the only thing that is comprising your existence is the relationships you have with other people, which means it turns back the AC goes to AC. First one, the contention. As no reason contention, first you never know the constitution of the aim of action, which you would never know whether it's permissible or not. You would not default to the fact that it's morally permissible. I argue that you would say to presume the killing is wrong because there is still some sort of basic intuition of life's wrong. You should presume that as the basis of any reasoning absent any other obvious because you should gut check on the issue. Second of all, my argument is that he does not prove that you should take the perspective of the victim or the perspective of the abuser. There's no reason why you would presume that it is permissible for them as opposed to permissible for somebody else also. Now it can't be permissible for them because it would necessarily contradict both of them. Since the one cannot take the action when the other takes the action, so it doesn't make any sense. Also, the third response to the argument, he says that they will the action. My argument isn't necessarily they will the action, they can just do it also. If they will the action, they don't recognize this as morally permissible, they can just recognize that necessary or out of instinctual, so it does not necessarily mean that it has to do with moral permissibility. Go to the all over again the framework. On the chess argument. Just because you play chess does not mean you have reason to checkmate your opponent. Near, but no, you're right. As far as you're playing chess, you have a reason to checkmate your opponent, but in order to have a reason to checkmate is not sufficient. One does not play chess. One has to have a reason to play chess. If you do not care about the game, you have no reason to check your opponent, whether or not you're in fact playing chess. The analogy is your realm of actions that if one wants to get an overtime of the other opponent is constitutive, then it's not necessary to show some constitutive agency, which means that if this applies to all the arguments, because you cannot derive constitutivism from something, you have to have some sort of external standard. The absurd condition is the only external standard because all you know is that you exist. Yeah. It's all in this argument. Let me delete the stuff I didn't read. There you go.
So, the affirmative and negative is advocate one consistent ethical framework and not change their ethical framework's implications if it is false.
And then I extend the other link, which is that this means there can be no triggers because if your framework is false, then that triggers other arguments out of the framework.
Okay. So you said that that I have to advocate one consistent ethical framework. You can't change it. Did I change it?
My argument is that you cannot have the ability to change it.
Where did it say the ability to change it?
Well, the implication I gave is that you can have no skep triggers, right? Like the clarification.
No, it says you cannot trigger.
Right. I didn't read.
You never said.
Right. I didn't read the interpretation word for word because I applied it specifically to your advocacy. My argument is that you cannot trigger skepticism because it is not a consistent framework.
You can't trigger. But where do you say you can't have the ability to trigger?
Wait, my argument is that the AC can have no skep
trigger.
trigger. No, what I said in the last speech was the AC cannot have any skep triggers. So that is obviously the ability to trigger skep. Because skep cannot be triggered in the AC because there's like no one can trigger.
Okay, that's not the interpret.
The interpret was in NC, right? I read a second sentence after the, or I extend a second sentence after the
Okay,
interpret.
that's not
There are
positively
three
worded,
skep
right?
triggers.
The only thing you got
Right.
positively worded is this stuff. That the app was advocating consistent ethical framework and not change it. And you can't trigger a new ethical framework. Whatever.
No,
Let's
like
look
the
at
interpretation
Stratsky.
is that you cannot have skep triggers.
Okay.
I don't know what you're asking.
What was the answer? Let's look at Stratsky.
Sure.
What are the three arguments? A.
Right. The A point is that I have to cover a double layer of arguments because I have to answer your framework and I have to.
Why don't I have to cover a double layer of arguments, right?
Because I don't have a trigger to other frameworks.
Yeah, but
that
you
would
get
go
to
for me.
choose whether to trigger or not, right? So I have to
Wait,
do
well,
whether
I don't have
trigger-
any triggers.
No, but it's you are the one that triggers it. You are the one that triggers internals.
Well, the
so
point
I
is that
have to deal with whether skep affirms or negates.
Well, like that.
and the trigger.
Well, that
right?
gets into like my analysis about like this isn't all I read, right? I made more analysis. That gets into my analysis about how if I have to trigger it, then that means my strategy is to not trigger the framework, which means my only way out is to link into your meta ethic, which is like I made arguments about why my top closure is constrained, things like that. Like that leaves me in a position whether I answer your framework and you trigger it, or I don't answer your framework, which means
Why does it force you to contradict yourself?
because certain arguments I can make can answer one framework and prove the other, which means you can extend them. Like for example, you can extend a defensive reason.
Okay, if you have a framework which is like Dantology, now you have a framework of like util, can't you just like link to both and then like whichever one is right, you're valid with those arguments?
Well, no, because if I disprove Dantology, your argument is that it triggers skepticism, that it bypasses like the utilitarian arguments. There is a skep trigger. That means I have to make some contradictory argument because one of the arguments for Dantology or against Dantology, like one of them will trigger something else.
How does that result in contradictory arguments? That one might trigger another. Why does that mean you have
Because
to make
Dantology and
contradictory
skepticism are incompatible, right? Your argument is that constitutivism and skepticism are incompatible, that constitutivism gets out of skepticism. So if they are incompatible and I have to argue against both of them, I run the risk of contradicting myself.
You run the risk of contradicting yourself.
Okay. Which speeds my NC strategy.
Why don't I get RBI?
Why don't you get an RBI? Oh, the reasons are below here. You don't look at them. They're here. First, there's no reason why we have to reward you for just doing your job. Take the pants example. The second is that there's already a two-way street, so it solves back for your times to your reciprocity, whatever concerns, because you can run a theory on something I did. So, and if I run a theory on something you did, then we both have impacts that are offensive, they can run us around, and that there's no more kicking in the ACY. You have to have a same level of reciprocity.
Third. What was third?
Third, it discourages the better interpretation in favor of the person who's better at theory, because theory is meant to check abuse as opposed to like determine a better interpretation given whoever is better at theory. it's supposed to fill some sort of objective standard.
And what was the fourth argument?
It says that it is worse for you to have an RDI because it incentivizes me to go all in on theory to make sure that I win, and I will always win the time trade-off more there than on substance, because like in theoretical, it says that I will go all in if you go all in, so it maximizes time to go no all in.
Alright, how does the NC link to constituents?
My argument is that it says that it is constitutive of us to aim for a way out of the absurd condition. Why? Because it explains our existence, because it explains truth.
How does it explain truth?
Well, it leads to truth, right? The absolute is what truth is. So the absurd condition.
The absolute? What's the absolute?
The absolute is like something that would explain why we live, all of our, like, the meaning of life functionally.
Okay, so you're saying that we create truth.
God would be the absolute.
Alright, so if I prove God exists, does that take on the NC?
No, Awkward one evidence would still prove. Right? I mean, no, you can make arguments. That's what Heiselman did at PVT, but like, God existing is not a sufficient condition. The reason is because if God existed, Awkward one says that we would not understand the existence.
Okay.
We would not understand this maxim because they're not in the world. So.
Alright.
Sorry about not let you run this.
We're going to be theory. Actually, starting on the RBI debate. That's theory. Theory, AC.
So on my interpretation or counter-interpretation?
Yeah, counter-interpretation.
Okay.
Then NC, AC.
It's a counter-interp, RBI, NC, isn't it?
Counter-interp, yeah, then his argument, his interp, RBI, NC, AC. You ready?
Counter-interpretation skepticism is okay. The first philosophical ground, most philosophers justify their theory of relation skepticism. The course guard starts from the premise of whether a theory can answer the normal question, which is the skeptic testing whether or not most system can answer the skeptic is paramount to ensuring it's fully justified. That's what Kaltsponus does in his article, Philosophical Grounds Keys, and A dictates your ability, perhaps, and dictates your ability to cut philosophical cards, and B, framework comes first, and frames the balance of other arguments after philosophical ground outweighs. On his interp. One, I mean text-based interpretation. Text-based interpretation just says whether I actually changed the normative theory or triggered skepticism. That's what the interpretation was. Don't let him say that there's something different, because it definitely wasn't on my flow, and it's also not what the text interpretation is that I called. So that means as far as I haven't triggered it, that means that I'm meeting his text of interpretation. Second, I mean because the text of interpretation says you can't trigger another ethical theory, but I'm not triggering another ethical theory. My arguments are skept triggers, which is not an ethical theory. So I meet. Third, if anything, If anything, it would be he would be. I can't possibly trigger the response. It would be his argument that triggers it, which would the implication that if anything, if skepticism were to be triggered, it would be him triggering it, not me. So the only person who could possibly buy the interpretation is him. And fourth, this just begs the question of what my standard is in the AC, if it's just like permissibility or like the truth of resolution as opposed to like a normal framework. And OV to the standards analysis. One. My interpretation is entirely simple and does not preclude any sort of strategy because we both have equal access to skeptics in the negative case. That means there's no preclusion of strategy, but moreover, one, you can turn the arguments. I need to be able to preempt the skeptic debate in the 1AC. Otherwise, the next row is when it's time, I would have to restart the debate in the 1AR2. You can turn again. This helps the next round because the next can just trigger skeptic and go all in on skeptic gates, which is the true side of the argument. And three, you can dump on either A, the neg doesn't want to trigger skeptic, in which case it wasted my time in the AC, or B, the neg does want to trigger engage the skeptic gate, in which case the neg can trigger it and be ahead on the issue. And on his specific arguments, one, the first argument, he says that he says the only way to link, the only possible ground he has would be linked to constitution. But one, this is equitable because it's entirely equitable because we both do. We both have to link to the extension of the framework. And second of all, he can have his ethical theory too, which I would have to link my ethical theory to. Then the B point is the links to that otherwise he would have to contradict himself, but that's entirely clear because that's like having saying that deontology and utilitarian are different theories. You can still have offense both without contradicting yourself. Second, it's just a risk of a contradiction. He never explains how this contradiction manifests itself, so you're not buying it. It's on the C point that you wouldn't be able to have good defense. First, you can cross-apply the philosophical ground. You have better defense because you get to test whether or not the theory actually is capable of overcoming skepticism. The second, you can still have good defense. He has the most argument proves it. On the RBI debate in the affirmative case, on the first argument, he says it would be illogical because then you reward me for doing things that I didn't do. But that's just begging the question why that matters. Is okay, maybe you should do it. But second, I have impact and fairness. My arguments have an impact. Next, he says that then there's no impact of running theory. But that's not a response to my arguments. My argument is that I'm at a disadvantage, so I need this to hedge against the structural unfairness of affirming the resolution. And my ability to run theory is not based on reciprocity argument. All he says that the better debater will always win, but that's not unique. Better debater always wins. Then the fourth argument is that I can go on theory. But one, at least I'd way win theory if we have an RBI. And second, that's not unique because you can go on theory, all on theory if he thinks wins. He said in the negative case we agree with time constraints before the round. That's entirely relevant because the ballot still asks the better debater. So the ballot still asking who did the better debating. You can fix that in the top front case that you need to presume after 7% Nick by same size with 32,000 rounds. So that means the owl will come over the greatest disadvantage. That's the internal warrant for why I need the RBI to go to the NC. One. Turn it domestic violence to include self-constitutions. The Constitution was a distance externally imposed, so use deadly force permissible as a means of creating conditions that allows for self-constitution. 2. Turn extension of classes subjectiveness as we choose morality for ourselves, victims which subjectively choose to affirm so they get out of the abuse. 3. Turn under extension of everything is permissible. Start. Does anyone reach more quotes of artists enough on the rule established operates government asked the picture that he brought to eye? There are no aesthetic values out here, but the values which appear to us in due course appears in the picture. 5. 4. Turn. No one else can obligate me to act in a certain way. Start. 2. We limit ourselves to reliance upon what is within our wills within some probabilities which are actually feasible. One does not rely upon the possibilities beyond which are strictly conserved. One's action beyond the point there's no possibilities on consideration because no effect of my action. I have to disinterest myself from others.
Alright, so I see that I have 46, I think. And I see the stuff you just read. Thanks. What was the argument in response to the number 2 argument I made?
Alright, so that was the, you can run through 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, 1, that's irrelevant because, like, I'm saying I'm a structural disadvantage.
Okay.
So,
Is there anything
you being run through, and then next, my internal warrant is not reciprocity, it's times 2. So, I didn't run a reciprocity argument, so that intersimple is irrelevant.
Okay, starting on the RBI arguments on the number 2 and the number 4 on the AC flow, then going to the NC, and then back to theory.
Wait, so starting on the NC.
Starting on the AC on RBI,
Okay.
then NC, then theory. Thank you.
Like you're 2 and 4, right?
Yeah,
What?
go.
You're NC number 2 and number 4, right?
Well, AC,
That doesn't matter.
AC truth, yeah, well, I'll explain. It's on the RBI arguments on the AC right now. Right, ready? Big problem not answering that much of the interaction between the Lowland evidence and the voter on the fairness level and the implications for the RBI arguments on times 2. He concedes that he does not make a reciprocity argument, which means the only argument he has for RBI is that he's structurally disadvantaged because of times 2 to 5, but the times 2 is not a relevant consideration in terms of impacting back to fairness, and that means that there's literally no reason to vote on the RBI. Also, I'm going to have proactive reasons to not vote for him on other levels, so you should err neg on this question because I'm going to be having offense on other levels, whereas he just has that one argument. First, extend the number 2 that there's a two-way street on there's no reason why he needs an RBI because there's already a two-way street on theory. Then he could solve that for the times 2 and the rest cross the problem by running theory on another issue, which means it solves back the fact that the affirmative is disadvantaged because now they are on the parallel level. I think he can just win comparative offense back instead of having on the same level. He says that this only answers the rest cross question, but no, it also signs back the times 2 question because he can just run here, i.e. there is no disadvantage for him doing something on that, picking something out of that I did. So that solves back 100% of the time here, which means there is no reason to prefer an RBI. That means any risk of offense on any other arguments for why you should not have an RBI is a reason to not have one. So the problem is that he's making 2 non-unique, but any risk of offense on them is sufficient. So extend the number 4 RBI argument. That is worse for the applicant to go all in on theory, whereas the asterisk covers less likely to happen. So one on substance, my argument that I would be less likely to go all in on theory if he just does not read an RBI, which means that overall it would be a comparatively bad interpretation. He says it's not unique because I would go all in, and we would know that's not necessarily the case. There's still a risk of opposite. No, not in every round everybody's going to go all in, which means that there's still a marginal risk of opposite. Also extending number 3, that if there were two-way which skirts better interpretation in favor of the debater who's just better at theory. He says that the better debater at theory always wins, but no, if you don't have an RBI, then even if the person defending theory is better, then that means that the person doesn't win theory, but they don't lose the round, which means that the key part is that you don't lose the round on theory because theory is supposed to be a check and abuse. So if they prove that the interpretation is fair, then that is fine. If they would not lose the round, so the distinction that he's making is that both debaters not lose on theory if there's an RBI, so the better debater would not be able to take advantage of the fact that he or she has an RBI. So there's a risk of opposite both of those arguments. Since I'm not unique to number 2 means you're not getting an RBI, go to the NC. Okay. Read the cards after the round. They don't say anything close to what he says he does. First, extending Harper-Ward evidence that says that the only thing we know about us is our existence. That the only way we can explain things is through an absolute unity, but the absolute unity does not exist because we cannot explain it in terms of our reference, because we are not aware of it. We cannot understand God's maxims, and we cannot understand God is not of this world. Then extending the Harper true evidence means that life is still valuable because life is what gives us the ability to pursue our existence, or pursue the truth, get out of the absurd situation. Then extending the evidence to the bottom says that you cannot use deadly force because that would be inferior to judge, jury, and the executioner, because since we are all in the same position, you would locate a standard external to the absurd. But that means that you would be violating the point of the absurd, i.e. because you cannot escape the absurd, you would already be violating moral principle that is external to the Harper-Ward evidence. That takes out the sergeant and sergeant true evidence, because his evidence is my argument is that he is looking at the a priori standard, i.e. the a priori standard is killing the person. I'm not looking at the a priori standard because the only thing we know is that we exist. That is a fact. That is conceded by the Harper evidence of Sartre. I'm going to read you the Sartre evidence. Sartre just says that we cannot decide a priori what it is that should be done. My argument is that we do not decide a priori. That's the point. He would decide a priori if you would say that we are to kill someone. I don't decide a priori because my argument is that I'm not acting. I'm just saying that we would find truth in our world, and that is the only constraint. Then, on is number 1. He said that the divine self-constitution, since the conditions of one's existence are externally imposed. My argument is that self-constitution is not what the evidence of that. I'm just linking into his framework. I'm not relying on his framework, which means it is irrelevant. His number 2 is that the existentialist left is just subjective because we choose morality for ourselves. No, my argument is that we don't choose morality ourselves. Camus answers our argument because if we chose morality for ourselves, then we would be able to violate we would be able to locate it. That means it triggers the fact that we locate the standard external. I.e., if we would choose to kill the person, that still follows the problem of Camus evidence. That is just a random piece of defense. Then on his last Sartre true evidence, he just says that no one else can obligate me to act in a certain way. My argument is that other people can't obligate me in a certain way because you can send the original Sartre evidence that the other is necessary to mediate, to provide a reference point for your own existence. So it's not that you care about them, it's the fact that you care about yourself and your pursuit of truth, which means that since your pursuit of truth is constituted by the fact that you are in human relationships with other people, it means that there's no other way for you to do it. It means that it violates your own source of truth if you kill another person. So that answers back the evidence. Also, he's just miscutting Sartre. Sartre does not say that everything is permissible or killing is permissible. This does not say the word killing. It should just call this evidence. It just says that conquer yourself rather than the world. That doesn't make any sense. It's just a bunch of fake rhetoric. Go to the theory. That's theory. On the first on the voter on the low stuff. Okay. Except voting on fairness is necessary, respect voluntary tasks to inform the basis of the arbitrary distribution burdens, residency, pay left, well, and flow to evidence. You vote on violations, fairness, correct, by broken contract with conscience, that in case of intentional violations, you cannot just restore the initial situation. That means you drop the argument, drop the debate, or not the argument. So,